We all know that when there are different varieties of a species within a population, and those different varieties are heritable, natural selection will favor the most fit of those varieties, and evolution will occur. To an evolutionary biologist, fitness has nothing to do with how big or strong a given variety is, but what really matters is how many offspring an individual will leave, and how many offspring the offspring will leave, and even how many offspring the offspring of their offspring will leave behind. The varieties that are best at leaving offspring behind will then have the highest fitness. Over time, we know that natural selection will operate on this population and increase the frequency of the most fit variety. This is typically how we think about fitness. The variety with the highest fitness is more fit than the next, and the next type is more fit than the least fit variety. This means that the most fit variety is definitely more fit than the least fit variety. Because this adheres to the transitive property, we call this transitive fitness. However, this idea of transitive fitness is a pretty simple one, and fitness definitely does not always behave like this. Consider the side-blotched lizard of the American Southwest. Males are decorated with colorful blotches on their sides. These male lizards have blotches that are one of three colors: orange, yellow, or blue. When blue and yellow males are around, female lizards much prefer the big, strong blue males. If blue males get more ladies, they have more offspring, and therefore they are more fit. Therefore, blue males are more fit than yellow males. When blue and orange males are around, however, the smart and sneaky orange males end up doing better with the lady lizards. So orange males are more fit than blue males. Since blue males are more fit than yellow males, and orange males are more fit than blue males, that should mean that orange males are more fit than yellow males, right? Actually, when yellow and orange males are hanging around together, females much prefer the yellow males. In this matchup, yellow males are more fit than orange males. So orange beats blue, and blue beats yellow, and yellow beats orange. This should remind you of a pretty familiar game. These lizards are playing rock, paper, scissors. No color is the most fit of the three, just like no strategy is the best of the three in rock, paper, scissors. Since the transitive property does not apply, this is called non-transitive fitness. Non-transitive fitness occurs when there is no best or most fit strategy. Rather, the fitness of a variety depends on who it's competing against. Evolutionary biologists actually expect there to be lots and lots of examples of non-transitive fitness in nature. However, it's hard to find them because it's really hard to measure fitness in most species. Our lab studies budding yeasts, a group of tiny single-celled fungi that include the yeasts that are responsible for brewing beer or baking bread. There are thousands of different yeast species, and our lab has recently found a trait that exhibits non-transitive properties across different yeast species. If you look at these Petri plates with different types of yeast growing on them, you'll notice that some of the yeast look pink, or even dark red. These yeasts are secreting some sort of compound that is changing their color. We can isolate that compound that they are secreting and find out why it turns pink. Here, a scientist in our lab is isolating the compound that the yeast are secreting. The scientist now adds iron to a tube containing the isolated compound. We can see that it starts to turn dark red when the iron is added. Based on this color change, we now know that the compound the yeasts are secreting is capable of binding iron. So when we see that certain yeasts turn their culture media dark pink, we know it's because they're secreting a compound that is binding to the iron, or Fe, in the environment. This compound is called Procurement. Iron is an important nutrient for all living things, including yeast, and some yeasts appear to use Procurement to snatch iron up from their environment. Scientists in our lab have found that Procurement use is controlled by 3 important genes. The first 2 genes, we'll call them gene 1 and gene 2, are responsible for actually making the Procurement inside the cell. The Procurement is then secreted through the cell membrane and out into the environment, where it sticks tightly to the iron. The third gene, which we'll call gene number 3, makes a transporter that brings the iron-bound Procurement back into the cell from the environment. Using these 3 genes, some yeast cells are able to use Procurement to gather up iron from outside the cell. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of different yeast species. We know that not all yeast species use Procurement to get their iron. Why not? When scientists in our lab looked across hundreds of different yeast species, they found that some yeast species had all 3 genes, meaning these yeasts could use and make Procurement to get their iron. We also found out that there are a lot of yeast species that only have gene number 3. This means that they can take up Procurement if it's out there in the environment, but they can't make it for themselves. There are also a lot of yeast species that do not have any of these 3 genes. They can't use or make Procurement at all. Why have all these differences evolved in yeasts? Let's think about the 3 strategies we observe. Strategy 1 is for a yeast to have all 3 genes, so that they can make, secrete, and use Procurement. Strategy 2 is to only have gene number 3. This means that these yeasts can use Procurement to get iron from the environment, but only if there are other yeasts around that are making it. Strategy 3 is to have none of these genes, and rely on less efficient ways to get iron from their environment. This actually sets up a non-transitive interaction, just like we saw in those side-blotched lizards. In this rock, paper, scissors game, who beats who? Think about each matchup. Who would have the higher fitness? Take a minute to talk about it and decide. Who is rock? Who is paper? Who is scissors? Let's start with matchup number 1. A yeast with all 3 genes that makes and uses pulcaramin, and a yeast with none of these 3 genes who cannot make or use pulcaramin. If these guys were growing in the same environment, which strategy would be more fit? It would be the first strategy. The top yeast could use pulcaramin to hog all the iron in the environment, and the bottom yeast would have a tough time acquiring iron, which we know is really important. In the second matchup, we'll imagine that a yeast does not have any of the 3 genes, is sharing the environment with yeasts that only have gene number 3. Who would win here? In this matchup, the top yeast would be more fit because the bottom yeast is wasting time and energy trying to steal pulcaramin when there is no pulcaramin available to steal. Now for the third matchup. What happens when a yeast that makes and uses pulcaramin to get iron is growing in the same environment as a yeast that only uses pulcaramin? Who has the better strategy here? In this matchup, the bottom yeast would outcompete the top yeast. This is because the bottom yeast is a cheater that is stealing the pulcaramin that the top yeast spent time and energy making. The bottom yeast doesn't waste any energy making pulcaramin. He just steals the pulcaramin being made by other yeasts. Here we have a good example of non-transitive interactions between different types of yeast. This is also an evolutionary game of rock, paper, scissors. Can you think of any other examples of situations where there is no best strategy in games, sports, or other parts of your life? This video should have taught you that sometimes fitness is all about who your neighbor is.